Ryan Reaves is gone, but Pat Maroon has made his way to Minnesota. We'll talk about the trade as well as a couple of minor free agent signings and an update on the restricted free agents the Wild have yet to play. That's all on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That is right. What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we welcome you on board. Hope you stick with us through the rest of the offseason into the season as well. If you're one of the everydayers who tunes in each and every day of the week, we are glad to have you back. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Alex Micheletti joins us as we break down the Pat Maroon trade, what it means for the Wild in the room with the pedigree and experience that Maroon brings to the table. We'll also talk about the two-way contracts the Wild signed today with Vinni Lettieri and Jake Lucchini. And we'll take a look at the latest on the restricted free agents for the Minnesota Wild here this offseason. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. As mentioned, Micheletti Mondays are back, even though it is 4th of July weekend. We've still got some things to discuss here today. So, Alex, thanks for taking some time out of the 4th of July weekend. Looked like it was going to be a pretty quiet weekend for the Minnesota Wild. And then all of a sudden, Sunday night hits, and Bill Guerin goes out and replaces Ryan Reaves with Pat Maroon. This one was a little bit of a surprise, but I got to say, considering that they got Maroon and a prospect for a 7th-round pick in 2024, and the Lightning are retaining 20% of Maroon's salary. Pretty savvy, good move for Bill Guerin.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, for providing information or a deal for content tonight. I was like, when it went down, I messaged you right away. I was like, well, thank you, Bill Guerin, for giving us something to talk about. When Tampa signed Josh Archibald to be on their 4th line, it looked like Pat Maroon was expendable, and so that's probably what got the wheels in motion for Tampa to find a spot for Pat Maroon. I think he's so well respected in the league and by Tampa Bay that they wanted to do right for him, and he had a no move clause on his deal with Tampa, and the Wild weren't on it. So one of the teams that would have been an option for him. So funny enough, he's not too far across the border in Wisconsin right now. I saw on his Instagram story he was with Ryan McDonough at Ryan McDonough's cabin in Balsam Lake, Wisconsin. So I'm sure he's excited for a new chapter in his career. And I'm excited. I think he brings a little bit more on the ice than Ryan Reaves. He's definitely a vibes guy too, but I still think he can still play at 35, going to be 36. And, if I tweeted this out too, if Duhaime resigns, that 4th line should be pretty fun with, Connor Dewar centering, Maroon and Duhaime.
And I know one of the things that people looked at with Ryan Reaves, and he signed with Toronto for 3 years at $1.3 million per. So that was out of the range the Wild were comfortable with, not only in AAV, but in term too. And so you get a guy in Pat Maroon who it was over 150 hit. He had 150 penalty minutes this past season. He played in 80 games. And if you break that down, he was 2nd in the league in fighting majors this past season with 12. Now, Marcus Foligno and Ryan Reaves had 7 apiece. And so I think there was a lot of discussion about, Reaves didn't seem like he fought all that much. And is that something that really makes a difference. And first and foremost, Pat Maroon is not afraid to fight anybody. Like, get that right out there. But he also had a ton of hits too. He averaged about 2 hits per game. So he's a physical fourth line guy that isn't afraid to throw his body around either.
Yeah, he has a little bit more of a scoring punch than Reaves too, and that fourth line that they had in Tampa was pretty effective with him, Bellemare, and Corey Perry, and so you're trying to improve the offense there on the fourth line if need be, and he's a guy that's not afraid to call out teammates and stick up for teammates too, and you saw it all the time with Tampa Bay, from the bench too, chirping the other teams, and getting his own teammates fired up too. And so he's a Midwestern guy from St. Louis, and so I think he's going to like being back in the Midwest and being closer to the family. They can come from Missouri to Minnesota, and just another another step in his journey in his career. He's been all over the place, Anaheim and St. Louis and Tampa, now with the Wild, and a guy that's won 3 Stanley Cups. You'll take that any day of the week with that experience. He was close to a 4th in a row, which would have been nuts, but it was time for Nathan MacKinnon to win a Stanley Cup. But I'm really excited for this move. I think, like I said, I still think he has some left in the tank, and just another vibes guy. I mentioned it on Twitter when we found out that Reaves was not going to be back. I was like, well, it's going to be interesting to see how Bill Guerin replaces the energy vibes guy with Reaves and Matt Dumba leaving, and he gets Pat Maroon by the end of the weekend, and so it's a savvy move. Tampa's paying part of his contract, so they'll take that as well, and like you joked about too, $800K left in cap space, and they sign him with that amount. So very, very funny, very interesting.
Yeah, it's ironic because Bill Guerin was interviewed, I believe, by Michael Russo earlier in the day, or actually, it was his press availability after
Right.
the Lettieri and Lucchini signings. Talked about the fact that they have, with the restricted free agents they're expecting to add into the mix, they have about 800K in the books to spend. And it just so happens that that's what Pat Maroon is going to be on the books for. So feels like, even though they said that this came together quickly yesterday, feels like this might have been in the works for a little while.
Yeah, like you said, and the fact that we heard rumors from Michael Russo that they were thinking about Corey Perry or Nick Foligno, and Pat Maroon fits that that type of same type of vibe, and so to get him at a discount too, they'll take it. They didn't have to give up anything. They aren't paying him $4 million like Chicago is with Foligno and Perry, and so they'll take that any day of the week. And I think he would fit in just great with Connor Dewar and Brandon Duhaime on that fourth line. So I think it's a perfect fit, and hopefully it does work out.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see how Big Rig does here in Minnesota.
The OG Big
the
Rig.
original Big Rig. So we both are on record of liking the move, and can't wait to see how it plays out. So you have that as kind of the big non-restricted free agent move that this team's going to be able to make. There were a couple of minor signings as well, and as we'll get to later in the show, we got ourselves a new assistant coach too. So there's a lot to get to here on today's episode of Locked On Wild. We'll talk about those minor league signings as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Take your first swing at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to be the first to hit a home run. If Shohei Ohtani's playing, go that route. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit fanduel.com/locked on to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's fanduel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thanks for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will take a look at some other options should the Wild decide to open up any additional cap space. We'll play what if with free agency the rest of the way. Some of those bargain bin options for this Minnesota Wild team. Now, Alex, as we continue to kind of break things down, a couple of minor AHL type signings, two-way contract signings, and let's start with the one that has a little bit of a tie to the organization already, that being Vinni Lettieri, the grandson of Lou Nanne, who signed a 2-year, two-way contract, speedster from what I've seen, and so an intriguing guy to add into the mix, much like when the Wild added Sammy Walker to the mix before last season.
Yeah, I think with Vinny, he'd be the, just like we saw this past season, the first call-up guy. A guy, if the Wild are struggling and they need someone to, add a scoring punch, I think he'd be the first guy called up. He had, again, in Providence with Boston's AHL team this past season, he had 20 plus goals, and so he can, he's a scorer, and he's the classic tweener, in between AHL and NHL, type guy, and it's it's nice storyline, and he's a guy like I said they could rely on, if the big club is struggling, or he might fill that Brandon Duhaime spot if if they can't come to an agreement, or if he gets traded. With him and Gus, it's just weird right now, but I think to give some credit to Duhaime too, and his agent, I think they're waiting on the Gus news, because that has to get settled first before they can determine exactly what Duhaime's contract is going to be too.
Yeah, and it's a situation too where there's not a huge rush. I mean, those two guys, Gustafsson and Duhaime, I mean, the Wilds have their rights. So there's not a huge rush necessarily, because if you don't get a deal done, you go to arbitration, then you can always go back. And so it's like pulling teeth for us.
Right.
Just trying to wait this out and to get this figured out. But at the end of the day, it's probably gone on a little longer than Bill Guerin would have liked. But at the end of the day, he is still confident that they'll both get done. And so it's about all we can go off of.
You have agents playing hardball right now. It's very frustrating. Yeah, it's unbelievable. You don't want. I don't think I've really ever seen it as a goalie going to arbitration. So hopefully they can avoid that. It just once you go to arbitration too, then the relationship gets kind of going forward gets a little dicey too, because you're battling over what the player thinks they're worth and what the team thinks they're worth, and it's all on the team side, it's always lower than what the player wants, and so it just creates for future contracts, or demanding of trades, possibly. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. And we forgot to mention Jake Lucchini too, Michigan Tech guy. Me being a big college hockey guy, I watched him a lot when he played Mankato. It's another guy that can score, and a classic tweener. He played college hockey just like Vinny did at the U, and so it's these guys that just can't become full-time NHLers, but if you need them in a pinch, they can help for a couple games or so.
Kyle Rao always kind of became synonymous with that over the last few seasons. A guy that played well at the AHL level, but just never had enough to kind of get past that. And yeah, you're one injury away from depleting your AHL roster, so you can never have enough of those guys that know what it takes to play at that level. Maybe, I don't know, maybe not the best, but just depth. Like, you can never have enough depth.
Yes, exactly. We've seen it with this Wild team too, and so it's better to have somebody there than to panic and then make another trade. So you have, they're collecting some of these guys in Iowa, and it's not too far away of a drive for them to get to St. Paul if needed very fast too. So it's another savvy couple moves by Bill Guerin with not a whole lot of money.
Alex, let's talk about the former Wild players that all signed deals. You've got Gustav Nyquist going to Nashville, Sam Steele going to Dallas. You got Ryan Reaves, of course, going to Toronto. There was a lot of activity in the first couple of days of free agency. Matt Dumba still out there. Were you surprised that Dumba was the last domino to fall, so to speak? I mean, I suppose Oscar Sundqvist hasn't signed yet, but of those main dominoes, were you surprised that Dumba was the last one left standing of all those guys that were former Wild players?
I'm extremely shocked because this was Matt Dumba was coming off one of the best seasons in his career, and just you saw these potential fits of teams that I thought he could go to, and they signed other guys. Like, even today, Seattle signed Brian Dumoulin from Pittsburgh. I thought Seattle might have been another spot because they have, they had a ton of cap space, and then Detroit signed Shane Gostisbehere, and that I thought, that's another spot that he could have gone to. And then Buffalo signed Eric Johnson, and that was my first thought is, Buffalo could really use Matt Dumba, and so it's like the options are starting to dwindle here. I think Carolina could use another defenseman, but they're trying to get Erik Karlsson, so they're going big game hunting, and so now it's like, does Matt Dumba want to go to a struggling Arizona team like Jason Zucker and take the payday? It's tough. It's tough for some of these guys. Now the options are slowly coming undone. Maybe Pittsburgh for Matt Dumba, or Edmonton is always needing defensemen. I would, why would you not want to go play with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl? So, I mean, I would check in with the Oilers and Ken Holland if I was Matt Dumba's agent.
There were rumors that he maybe would be a fit in Dallas.
Right.
Which
Dallas, I think they'd have to clear some more. They have Mason Marchment that is playing on their third line, checking line basically, and he's making a lot of money, and so that's a guy they could move, especially now that they have Matt Duchene, and Duchene can play with Sagan. So I think that's a guy that they could try to trade and free up some more space. They desperately would need a guy like Matt Dumba for sure, and especially when Ryan Suter's still part of that decor.
Yeah. And for those that are wondering, why the heck didn't the Wild do anything? There will be money freed up next year to make some moves. If they don't sign Matt Zuccarello, that's $6 million right there. If you don't bring back Marcus Foligno, that's 3.1 right there. You got Alex Goligoski coming off the books, Marc-Andre Fleury coming off the books. And so not only that, but the cap is expected to go up about $7 million, I think, to that 88-ish range. Or that'd be that'd be a $4 million bump from what it's currently at. And so this is going to be a year in which there's not a ton of money to do hardly anything, but there will be the opportunity to sign a few guys next year should the Wild decide to get back into the free agent fix next year.
Yeah, 100%. And you saw this free agency too. A lot of guys were just doing 1-year deals, and so they want to have a really good season and then cash in when the cap goes up. You saw Tyler Bertuzzi sign with Toronto, and Max Domi, your guy, also signing with Toronto. And one of the tweets I saw, which was absolutely cracked me up, is it looks like Max Domi's on vacation in Europe, and it's like whatever time at night, and so he's sleeping. So his agent must have agreed to a contract with Max not even awake, and he gets to wake up and is multi-millionaire with with Toronto.
Must be nice.
Gets to play probably with William Nylander, because they'll stick Austin Matthews with Marner and Bertuzzi probably. So playing with Nylander, not a bad second choice, that's for sure. And John Tavares. That top six is absolutely loaded.
That's pretty gross.
Yeah.
So relatively quiet, but we expected that was going to be the case. We did get an answer on one of the other big questions of the offseason, is who is going to be that vacant assistant coach. That vacancy has been filled, and so we will talk about the latest assistant coach that will try to fix this Minnesota Wild power play as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, for the everydayers, make sure you tune into tomorrow's episode when we'll take a look at some of the bargain bin options for the Wild if they do decide to free up $1 million or $2 million here or there. That's coming up for you tomorrow. Jason King, the newest assistant coach for the Minnesota Wild, Alex, and he comes to the Wild from the Vancouver Canucks organization. He had some experience as an AHL assistant before that. Before we dive in, do you know a ton about Jason King? He comes in as kind of a relative unknown, I feel like.
Yeah, he played actually with the Sedins a little bit in Vancouver. He had a decent professional hockey career, and then got right into coaching. And so, from afar, I've always been a fan of Vancouver's power play. A lot of it has to deal with the personnel, but he ran the power play past couple seasons, and it led to a lot of goals for Elias Pettersson. So, and Brock Besser and all those guys in Vancouver, and they raved about his his power play system. And so, yeah, I'm excited for a new voice in, because it seemed like things were getting kind of stale, and just zone entries were always an issue too. And so, I'm excited to see what he brings to the table. He's a younger coach too, and so I'm sure he has aspirations to be a head coach here soon. And so, if things go well with the Wild, he can throw his name into the mix there. So, yeah, another good savvy move by Bill Guerin, and I'm sure Dean Evison had a huge say as well.
Yeah, I looked at the numbers for Vancouver's power play over the last 3 seasons, because I believe he was there for 3 years, and Vancouver was 9th, 25th, and 4th in power play percentage in the league over those 3 seasons. So that's obviously, as you mentioned, power play is a lot about your personnel. And so it's interesting, and this is something I'll probably dive into for a future episode, is 9th to 25th to 4th is a bit of a swing.
Right.
Like, what led to that kind of a drop? Because otherwise, 9th and 4th sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, 100%. And, now that they've kind of made the decision to have Calen Addison, well, at least to start the season, be your, quarterback of the power play, he's similar. They're not the same player. I'm just gonna say that right away, but same size in Quinn Hughes and Calen Addison, and so hope maybe he can unlock something in Calen's game. Obviously, Calen's got to defend better, to stay in the lineup, but he's going to be the one running the show on the power play, and he's going to have to produce, like he did for parts of the season, if he wants to continue to keep that role. He's the ideal choice, because I don't think they think that Jaron Spurgeon should be the one running that, and try to save him some minutes there.
Yeah.
Being on the PK and just more 5-on-5, and so it's a huge season for Kalen Addison, and once they get him re-signed, and we'll see what Jason King can do with him, and I'm excited because with the re-signing of Marcus Johansson too, I'd like to see him on that top unit and continue the chemistry with Matt Boldy for sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they structure the personnel because they went top heavy last year. It worked for a while, but then teams started to really key in on it to where they're like, hey, the best guys aren't out there. We don't really have to worry about this. Or just stack the blue line so that they couldn't even get in. Like it became so top heavy, so predictable, and so perimeter oriented.
Yeah, they couldn't. It was so frustrating. They had so much trouble just getting it into the zone, and if you can't even get into the zone, then you can't get set up. They didn't have a second unit really. They had guys on the second power play that aren't power play guys. Marcus Foligno has no business being on a power play, but he was. So, you have to, for your special teams, if you want to go far in the playoffs, you have to be successful, and they just struggled big time on the power play.
Yeah, and let's take a peek at the penalty kill as well, because I think it was either Jesse Pierce or Judd Zulgad that said it. You can get by in the postseason with a mediocre power play. If your penalty kill's mediocre, you are dead in the water. So
yeah. And the big the big thing too is face-offs, and Dallas absolutely just smoked the Wild on face-offs, and we saw one of the games against Dallas, and they scored power play goals right off the face-off. So even if your penalty kill's phenomenal, if you give up goal right off the face-off, it doesn't really matter, and obviously not having that was just absolutely killer. But still, the other teams in the playoffs, they aren't going to feel sad for you for having injuries, and so got to step up, and that's why Marco, he's got to have a huge off season because they didn't even trust him in the playoffs without Ecker there. So
yeah, it's
very, very interesting for a couple guys this off season.
It's going to be a big off season for a bunch of players, and can't wait for that to continue so we get closer to the start of the season, so we can just see how this all plays out throughout the course of the year. So there you have it. The big one, the Patty Maroon acquisition. We'll dive into more of that as the offseason unfolds. We'll try to mix in some more potential bargain bin players in free agency, because I would imagine, depending on how the numbers go for Gustafsson and for Duhaime, they may look to add one or two other guys just to kind of fill things out. But we'll see. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Now that you are finished listening to today's episode, make sure to go back and look at all of our draft coverage with all of the different selections for the Minnesota Wild, and stick with us through the rest of the offseason as well. If you are a first-time listener to the show, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new content throughout the rest of the offseason. If you're an everydayer who tunes in every single day of the week, we are glad to have you, and look forward to hearing from you again on tomorrow's show. So enjoy the 4th, and we will be back with you on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Wild. New content every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.